So as we continue our discussions on DC Rebirth, something that I want to point out here is, again, going through and looking at what it is you guys like and what you don't like. I've actually updated the schedule, which you'll again find down in the description. Something to keep in mind is that this is kind of tentative until we finally settle on something that really seems to work. But what we do here is we pick up with the second story arc of the Superman solo series, which again focuses largely on Superman and his son. And this is one of the really cool things that I like about what we're getting with this Superman line of publications under Peter Tomasi. What it basically does here is he just, again, emphasizes Superboy and Superman. Now, for those of you guys who are new to DC Rebirth, this is the crux of things as they seem to exist. Way back when you had the old school DC comics, really before Crisis on Infinite Earths, the way it was set up is you had Superman stories which focused on himself, and then you had the Action Comics line of stories which focused on Superman in addition to his supporting cast. But as the years progressed, as the Crisis on Infinite Earths event happened, and as we started moving from 1985 really up and going into the New 52, the Action Comics and Superman line of stories began to merge in the sense that they were usually telling two sides of the same story, or sometimes it was just the same story stretched over both line of publications. But with DC Rebirth, it looks like DC's going back to the way things used to be, in the sense that Action Comics tells one line of stories and Superman tells another. And so with this son, I guess, Superboy, son of Superman situation, we pick up with Jonathan Kent working on a science project. And this is one of the reasons why it's so cool, is because we really get this homegrown feel to the Superman line of stories. We really get this feeling that we're getting a bit of behind the scenes. We're getting a feeling like what goes on in the life of Superman when he's not out dealing with superheroes. And I'm sure that's exactly what this is meant to be. Now, the project, as it's being worked on by Jonathan, seems to be some kind of electronic device or some kind of teleportation device. And my initial thought was that he was creating a mother box, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Instead, it seems as though he's just creating a technological device using his knowledge of Kryptonian artifacts, Kryptonian history, and so on. And the box ends up actually teleporting to the various Kryptonian crystals. Now, the reason why this happens is because they're within the Fortress of Solitude. And this is one of the other cool things too, is we get this really cool unspoken dichotomy, right? Where we have the life of Superman when he's working on scientific stuff with the sun. That doesn't happen in the house. It's almost the Superman equivalent to don't play baseball in the house, play baseball outside. Don't work on your Kryptonian stuff in the house, work on your Kryptonian stuff in the Fortress of Solitude. Not only that, I think this really gives the son of Superman kind of a place to understand his heritage, because this was really a big question when I initially picked up the comic, is how much emphasis is going to be placed on Jonathan Kent learning about the history of his family, learning about the history of the House of El. And so it seems to be that even if we don't see it in the pages, even if it's happening off panel, that Superman is teaching his son the history of Kryptonians as best he can. And so what happens is that when this device touches the Kryptonian artifacts, it activates and it teleports Superman and his son to an island. Now, this is one of the really cool things that DC Rebirth is doing, because as we know, DC Rebirth is designed to combine the pre-New 52 and the New 52 continuities. But there were a lot of things that were done pre-New 52 that were out of continuity. They were just stories that existed out there. They were largely considered to be Elseworlds, but not every time were they branded Elseworlds. Instead, they were just stories that was there. A perfect example of this is a DC line of publications. It was a 6-issue limited series, I think in 2003, 2004, and it was called DC The New Frontier. Now, those of you guys who read those line of stories, I'm sure you're nodding your head and you're saying, oh, thank God, because DC New Frontier was a really good line of stories, and we'll get more into that as we go through this video. But with their immediate arrival, of course, the question is, where are they? Now, this is one of the cool things here, because with Superman, we expect fearlessness, right? We expect the Superman that we all know and love to say, okay, I'm in a strange situation. The worst thing I can do is panic, especially considering the fact that he has his son with him. And that's why I like this so much, because for Jonathan Kent, and this is actually something that we're going to focus on here in a little while, he's still just a boy. And it's very easy for Superman to lose track of the fact that his son is just a boy. Now, in truth, despite being just a boy, he's still formidable in his own right. I mean, he's extremely durable. He may not necessarily be on the same level as his father, but Jonathan Kent is not someone that you just run up and take a wallet from. He's not a kid you just run up and mug. He has the whole range, the whole gamut of abilities that his father has. But being on this island or being in this location, because they don't really know what's going on, the initial idea is to try to grab their bearings. Now, the other cool thing about this is that, as we know with the pre-New 52 Superman, it's always important to preserve life as best he can. This is really kind of a cornerstone of who he was as a person, that, all life is precious. And of course, this creates a whole nother slew of philosophical arguments. But the fact remains here that according to Superman, you should always preserve life as best you can, regardless of what that life is. And so when both Jonathan and Superman are set upon by a giant fish, Superman Superman could very easily just destroy this thing, but once he's on the inside of it, he realizes this thing has a beating heart, this thing has life, it is alive in some form or fashion, and so Superman effectively just escapes from it, without ever really having to kill it. Now, when they take off, or when they leave, they immediately go to the island itself, and they stumble upon what appear to be some various World War II artifacts, including a downed plane, different things like this. And this is one of the other cool things, is Superman gives his son a lot of history here in terms of history of the world, history of different wartime conflicts, things like that. And again, this is when we start delving into the realm of New Frontier. Now, we weren't told this, it wasn't as though, Tomasi just plastered, giant red letters over the screen and said, and suddenly we're in the New Frontier universe. Instead, it was just a gradual introduction, and we were just kind of left to believe that they were transported to an island somewhere. But Tomasi also takes the next step in telling us that, the most logical scenario for us as readers would be, well, if they can fly, why don't they just fly away from the island and back to, the Fortress of Solitude, or back to Superman's home with Lois Lane. But when they take off and they start, flying, the issue they run into is there's this massive fog that's surrounding the entire area, and they can't seem to get past it. Now, we'll talk a little more about this fog here in a second, once we actually start getting into the revelation of this being the New Frontier universe, but I feel like Tomasi's taking a step with this fog to have it represent something as, akin to a barrier, so to speak. But the fact remains here that as they're trying to make their escape, as they're trying to get away, again, they're suddenly set upon by pterodactyls, and these are massive beasts of huge proportions. And this is also one of the interesting things, because, Tomasi kind of leaves it to us to say, is this an accurate portrayal of dinosaurs? Would we expect to actually see pterodactyls of this size? In the end, it's not a huge thing. It's really just kind of fun to see Superman and his son fighting against dinosaurs. Not only that, in the midst of the onslaught, Krypto is actually eaten, or at least swallowed, by one of these dinosaurs. And I'll be 100% honest with you guys. When I saw that, I was so immersed in the story as I was reading it. When I saw that, I was like, oh my God, Krypto, I can't believe that. And then I had to pet Max, to make myself feel better. But it was, of course, we know Krypto, being a super dog, is easily able to make his escape away from this particular creature, which again, they basically just take off. And this is an on-running theme with Tomasi. He maintains the notion of everything, everything surviving, or at least seeming to have survived. And the reason why is because when it comes to this line of publications, when it comes to the Superman and Son line of stories and the Superman line of comics, these are not designed to be hard and gritty. It's not as though you're gonna have Superman and Jonathan Kent fighting off against slavers. You're not gonna see something like that. These are designed to be more upbeat, they're designed to be more fun, they're designed to be, fluff pieces in a lot of ways, as opposed to Action Comics, which might deal a little bit more with some dark and gritty stuff. But the other half of this is that Superman himself isn't really meant to be dark and gritty. That's one of the reasons why New 52 Superman wasn't really considered to be such a great piece of writing. That's one of the reasons why a lot of traditional Superman fans didn't like him, because there was enough dark and gritty stuff going on in DC Comics. You had the Green Lantern mythos, where you had the Sinestro Corps taking over, during the events of Edge of Oblivion. You have the Batman line of publications, Detective Comics, you got Nightwing, you have all these different publications that can give you dark and gritty stuff. Superman comics are supposed to be hopeful and fun, and that really seems to be what Tomasi's grabbing from us. But as we go through with Superman and Superboy, again, you're discovering more of these different foundations, what really appears to be kind of a World War II bunker style situation, where there's, machine guns and there's, barbed wire and so on. They eventually go into one of these bunkers and they come across a wall that says, this is the story of the losers. Now, this is where we started to get into New Frontier stuff. And the reason why I say that is New Frontier was a line of publications that was designed to bridge the gap between the Golden Age and the Silver Age. And the reason why I say that is in DC Comics, there wasn't really any indication of there being a clear-cut line between the Golden Age and the Silver Age. Instead, back in the 1950s, when the Silver Age officially started with the introduction of Barry Allen, it was just kind of this merging. It was just kind of this blurry line. The story, the origins of Superman from the Golden Age continued on. The origins of Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Batman, so on and so forth, from that era continued on. The whole reason why we got the Silver Age, the whole reason why we got Earth 1 was because the introduction of Barry Allen and Hal Jordan coincided with the vanishing of the original Flash, Jay Garrick, and the original Green Lantern, Alan Scott. And so fans were quite literally confused. They didn't really know what was going on. The question they had is, if Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, if those characters are still the same, then why do we have Barry Allen? Why do we have Hal Jordan? What happened to Jay Garrick and what happened to Alan Scott? And so what this did is it, again, allowed DC to basically create their multiverse going forward, but provide new origins. But there was still a lot of stuff that wasn't really covered there. Of course, we knew that superheroes were really popular during World War II, and within the line of publications, within the line of comics, we saw a lot of stories that dealt with World War II. Superman, in the very various superheroes fighting against the Axis powers, even though those leaders, you know, Mussolini, Hitler, Hirohito, they were never really mentioned by name. But the fact remains here that during this time, actually it was really going into the late 1960s and the early 1970s, DC was still trying to tap into the war market, just because of the fact that there was still some interest, even if it was falling away, you know, for the whole World War II, you know, Cold War era line of stories. And so the losers were originally introduced to feed into this, to basically give us as the reader during the late 60s and early 70s a depiction of, you know, different people fighting during World War II. The problem with this was that over the years, the losers started to receive a lot of retcons, retroactive continuities. For those of you guys who don't know, retroactive continuity is when a writer goes in and changes the past of something. There were a lot of retcons with the losers. There were a lot of in-continuity explanations that didn't make sense with what had previously happened. But DC New Frontier, again, kind of bridged this gap. And what DC New Frontier did is it came back and it told us, here's what was going on with superheroes between the Silver Age and the Golden Age. The issue with this is that it eventually fell out of continuity. And it got to the point where it was referred to as Earth 21. It was its own, you know, separate universe where John F. Kennedy had never been assassinated. You know, superheroes were, you know, people were a little fearful of superheroes early on, but then they started to embrace the idea of superheroes, you know, and it really changed things up. But the losers during this line of stories were, again, you know, they were American soldiers. They were fighting during World War II, and they were basically stuck on Dinosaur Island. And over the course of their stories, they had basically been killed off one by one until this guy, you know, Captain Storm, was the only guy left. And so what happens here is Tomasi basically brings Captain Storm back, and he seems to be the last survivor of the losers during the whole experience with, you know, on Dinosaur Island. And this is why I say he was starting to tap into New Frontier, because I hadn't really gone over it earlier, but if you guys were, you know, looking at the comic as we were going through it, we had seen an instance where we had, you know, basically there was a dog tag belonging to a guy named John Cloud. And John Cloud was a member of the losers. I think he was actually the leader or the second in command or something along those lines. My knowledge on the losers team isn't wildly huge, but it's enough that I can offer some explanation on the team. But, you know, with Captain Storm making his appearance here, one of the funny things in this situation is he doesn't recognize who Superman is. Now, this is where things seem to get a little hairy because of the fact that Superman was around during this time period, you know, when Captain Storm was active. So the question is, why doesn't Captain Storm remember who he is? But that's really not a huge point. I mean, in truth, unless you were somebody who's knowledgeable about comics, you know, during the World War II era, you know, unless you'd gone through and, you know, done a whole writing segment on the history of Superman, it wouldn't really occur to you to ask that question. But with them arriving here, you know, of course, the question is, where did you come from? Why are you here? You know, and Superman and his son are just as curious about, you know, Captain Storm as he is about them. And basically, Captain Storm just runs over the story that I just gave you guys, you know, essentially saying that he and his team ended up on Dinosaur Island. They were all being killed off one by one, you know, and so the question there, I guess the goal that Superman basically has is twofold. The first is paying respect to the legacy of the losers, and the second is to get off the island. Now, the way he pays respect here is actually really, really cool. You know, for Captain Storm, because he's been living day by day, simply just trying to survive, he hasn't really had the chance to give his dead friends the kind of burial that he thinks they deserve. And so Superman offers him this opportunity. He basically takes the bodies of these different people and starts burying them, you know, so that Captain Storm can effectively send off, you know, to those individuals that he fought against, to those friends that he had. But after this is done, because of the fact that Captain Storm has been on this island for so long, Superman and his son basically say, here's the artifact that we're looking for. Here's the device. Have you seen it? And he says, yes, but the problem with this is that it's most likely been taken by, you know, him or the person or the individual or being or whatever it is that's basically residing over this island, which interestingly enough, this seems to be kind of like a combination with King Kong. But touching back on the idea of Superman forgetting about the fact that his son is so young, that he's just 10 years old, this really hits home when it seems to impact Superboy, and he doesn't seem to believe that they're gonna make it home. He asks the question, you know, what happens if we never get home? And this is why I say this is so cool, because Superman sits down and he says, you know, yes, Superboy, you act so strong, you act so confident, and sometimes I forget you're only 10 years old. And this is such a beautiful piece of writing, because this is Peter Tomasi telling us that he is just a boy. He's extremely capable, he's very strong, he hasn't quite figured out how to fly yet, you know, but he is probably going to be every ounce the man that his father is. But at this point right now, he's a kid who thinks that he won't be able to get home and he won't see his mom again. And it's so cool because, you know, it really tells us that under all the powers and under all the abilities, he's just a kid. And so again, you know, because of the fact that Superman, you know, tells his son, yes, we're gonna make it home, you know, because he plays the Superman role and saying, we will get you back in one piece. Superman basically creates a wooden leg for Captain Storm so that they can make their way, you know, through the jungle in order to locate this box. Now, their journey eventually brings them deeper into the forest and what seems to be the middle of the forest, and they eventually come across a gorilla. Now, for those of you guys out there who are well-versed in DC Comics, probably more than I am, if you know whether or not this gorilla is an actual character from, you know, years past in DC, feel free to throw it down in the comment section to say, hey, that's like, this is, I'm pretty sure it's not Grodd, you know, but to say, hey, this gorilla has a name and here's what it is, feel free to say that, you know, because I'm not knowledgeable enough to know, you know, whether or not this is just a character thrown in for the sake of the story, or if this gorilla has a long-running history in DC. But again, you know, because of the fact that this gorilla seems to have absolute power here, because it seems to be the only real intelligent organism, it's more or less fashioned an army for itself using all the different creatures that exist on this planet, you know, or on this island. More so than that, it also has the device that Superman and his son are looking for. Now, what's also kind of cool here is that, you know, Superman basically tutors his son, you know, a little more in the use of his powers. And that's one of the reasons why this is cool, is because, you know, we would think, or at least it would seem, that if Superman were going to train his son in powers, he would take him to a field that he made or some huge empty area in the Fortress of Solitude and say, now just shoot your heat vision and keep shooting it until you do whatever it is that you need to do, or until you have full control. But instead, he basically takes him out of the field and says, you know, use your vision when you need to, you know, use your strength when you need to, you know, hold on to me because you can't quite fly yet. But the idea is that they basically fend off the forces of this gorilla, and in the conflict, they snatch the device out of the eye of the gorilla. Now, that's also kind of messed up too, when you think about it, that they literally snatch the device out of the gorilla's eye. But what's also cool here is that this artifact seems to be the same artifact that was contained within the eye of the octopus that they fought during the Son of Superman story, the first story arc, which you can find down in the description. But the fact remains that once they're able to grab this device and they're able to teleport away, the initial idea is that maybe Captain Storm will join them. But instead, he says no. He says that he's going to stay here and he's going to fight to death with his friends, even if that's what it takes. And so he basically stays behind, and Superman and his son make it back to the Fortress of Solitude. Now, the issue with this is we don't quite know exactly how this happens. You know, this gap isn't really being bridged by Tomasi at all, but he tells us, or he shows us anyway, that there is, of course, this giant octopus with the eye, that there is someone in possession of Captain Storm's peg leg, and that, you know, they have this artifact that belonged to this octopus, or seems to have belonged to this octopus, and they're simply watching everything unfold. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and bring this video to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys didn't hear any scraping in the background, but if you did, Max was eating stuff, whatever. Anyway, if you guys are new here to the Rob Corps, feel free to hit the subscribe button, you know, join the Rob Corps. If you guys want to see more Superman stuff, make sure you guys drop a like, and let me know down in the comment section what you guys thought about this video, and I will catch you guys later. Peace.